Welcome back everyone to another Downward Day. And today is a very special edition of the Downward Diary because it's not just going to be a downward day we're experiencing here in this video. It is going to be a downward week. That's right, I've evacuated from the dank swamps of North Florida. Hurricane Ian, Hurricane I-dubs is coming to rain on my parade, but I'm not gonna be in town for that to happen. And that's because I'm out here right now about 30 minutes west of Nashville, Tennessee, walking alongside some very ancient Indian burial grounds. Many viewers of the channel will know that this is not the first time I've touched on the Native Americans. In fact, last year at about the exact time I've been recording this, I released what I consider my greatest video of the year, my video on Talladega Superspeedway. And in the next few days, I'm gonna be paying a return to the most cursed racetrack in America. So I guess the following series of clips you're about to watch is my real-time experience at returning to the track that haunts many drivers, people, and this entire country, as a matter of fact. So you've seen the Talladega documentary. Now it's time to get down and dirty in the trenches. I'm gonna be going in and recording my true and honest experience around the track on this oh so fated race weekend. And we're gonna see just how much the Talladega curse lives up to its name. So at the beginning of this week, I was pretty anxious. The weekend before I flew out here, a giant hurricane formed in the Gulf of Mexico. And right as I was flying out, the projected path was forecast to hit right over my house. And all the way up until this point, this year has been a very quiet hurricane season. Really haven't seen hardly any storms threaten the US, let alone Florida. So I think in my head, man, we're home free. As long as nothing happens the week that I'm gone, everything should be fine. But man, maybe this whole hurricane scare is Talladega's way of cursing me. So for a moment there, it was looking like this thing was shaping up to be the ultimate disaster for me specifically. Not only would my house be at risk of being destroyed by the storm, but so would all of my travel plans as well. Where even though I was taking myself 800 miles away from this storm, it was still gonna find a way to ruin my day. Even though up until Monday or Tuesday, it looked like it was gonna hit my house, I ended up getting very fortunate because the storm ended up curving to the south and my house ended up being out of harm's way. You know, you could say that a hurricane is a lot like Talladega racing. There's just this sense of impending doom. That destruction is inevitable, and it's just a matter of being lucky enough to avoid it yourself. So I flew into Nashville, spent a few days at Wavy Webster's house, recorded a nice video with him that should be somewhere on the channel by the time this video's out. Then basically went across town to do the NASCAR Weekly podcast with the NASCAR YouTubers. All right, we are out on the road. I'm here with assistant editor Valerie. She's going to be piecing together this montage. And we are en route to NWP headquarters because tonight I'm appearing on the NASCAR Weekly podcast. Now, obviously, as a big NASCAR fan, I've been watching these guys for a while now, and they've had me on the show before, but this will be officially, at least, my first in-person appearance. So I'm pretty excited about that. Going to be talking a lot of NASCAR today, talking about the upcoming Talladega weekend. And being out here on the roads in the Nashville area, I'm certainly getting my preview of Talladega racing because the drivers here are freaking berserk. I don't know how this town, this city has been able to avoid a stigma as one of those places in America where people talk about how the traffic is awful. LA, New Jersey, New York, all that stuff, Miami. I have no idea how Nashville has thus far managed to stay off that list because man, the drivers here are giving me the authentic Talladega racing experience because driving on the roads here in rush hour makes me feel like I'm in the middle of the pack on the Talladega backstretch. Seriously, dude, I've been here for a full 2 days now and it's not a fluke. It's not a necessarily bad or unlucky experience. This is how the traffic is. Of course, coincidentally, when I'm recording this, it's cleared up, which is probably good for my mental health and my propensity to not total this rent-a-car. I've driven through a lot of cities, particularly most often in Florida. Orlando, Tampa, Miami, pretty notorious for awful traffic. I-4, awful traffic. What I just experienced going through downtown Nashville, just going to one restaurant in town and driving back to where I'm staying, it must have been like 45 minutes to go 10 miles. It's like, man, between 3:30 and 8 p.m., don't even think about going on the roads here, okay? You are going to be driven insane. But hey, you know, Talladega weekend, it's always known for a little bit of insanity. So maybe this whole place, this whole experience is just getting me ready for the right mentality when it comes to Talladega racing. Welcome to Nashville. Traffic as stressful as Talladega, but not quite as fast.
This is an indictment of how I think the race is going to go. My pick for the underdog dark horse is Cody Ware. I think the guys are going to go out there and just kill each other. Figuratively. Hopefully we don't see any.
Let's not say after what happened.
Yeah, let's hope not.
It's metaphorical.
It's going to be mayhem.
And then after that, we drove down to Birmingham. All right, it's the Friday before the race, and we're headed down from Nashville to Birmingham. And judging by this traffic so far, it's probably going to take a little bit longer than we anticipated. But you know what? That's okay, because I can use this time to deliver my thoughts and feelings and opinions on the race weekend we got in front of us. So now that we're out on the road, what better time than sort of, I guess, offer a bit of backstory for why I'm here in the first place. So last year, as many viewers of the channel may know, I uploaded a very special video, Talladega, NASCAR's most cursed track. And the making of the video in and of itself, I think, is interesting and worth talking about. So Talladega Superspeedway has always been something I've been sort of almost magnetically drawn to. And it's been like that since before I made YouTube videos. Since all the way back to when I was a kid, watching NASCAR for the first time, the 2 Talladega race dates on the calendar, it always seemed like something I felt super compelled to tune into. And yeah, in general, the racing is exciting, action-packed, eventful. It produces lots of memorable moments. But I think even from very early on, I could tell that there was some sort of quality about Talladega that made it a little bit different from the other tracks. This almost intangible, impending force that draws in the eyeball with morbid curiosity. There's definitely something frightening about the track. The whole place has sort of this aura of mystique and danger about it that I don't think any other track on the NASCAR circuit, or realistically any other sports venue in America, has ever managed to match. As a kid, I heard the stories, and I heard about the strange stuff that happened there. But it wasn't until I watched for many, many years and took an actual deep dive into the topic in the present day where I truly realized the totality of what exactly this track represents. So to this day, the Talladega video, out of every project I've worked on, is probably my most proud accomplishment as a creator. Thus far, I consider it my magnum opus. The writing, the production, the presentation, I just had the mojo while making this video. It was a story that I really felt proud telling. And it's honestly remarkable how well the video turned out, because the production schedule for this video was pretty much nightmarish. I mean, thinking off the top of my head, it's an hour and 10-minute video. It's the second longest runtime of any project I've ever made. And from start to finish, writing to posting to YouTube, I'd say I finished the whole thing in just about 40 days total. And that was a rate of production that I never managed before and will probably never manage since. I was working so much that it was starting to get uncomfortable, and it's not really something that I'd want to attempt again. And the reason for that was that I had a very particular desire in my head to get this video out before last year's autumn Talladega race date. October 3rd, 2021, that was the deadline that was seared in my head. This was something that was completely self-imposed. It probably wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever whether I made or missed the date, but just simply for the serendipity of the situation, I absolutely made it a mission in my head to get the video out by that date. And you know, it seems like the most powerful deadlines are the ones we impose on ourselves. And yeah, because of that, I ended up paying the price. So I ended up writing the entire 15-page script in about 10 days, spanning pretty much the entire last week of August 2021. And the moment it turned September, I was pretty much off to the races. I'd say for just about every single day, for about the next 28 days, nearly all of my waking hours would be spent recording, editing audio, editing video. And where it got exhausting was not necessarily from the intensity of the labor itself, but simply the fact that I was doing the same thing every single day. I was pretty much working 28 days in a row with no weekend, no off days, nothing. Just sticking to the same work routine every day, doing chunks of the video little by little. And it had to be that way because otherwise I wouldn't have made it in time. But man, after a while I could almost feel myself mentally unraveling. Like personally, I don't remember much from September 2021. It was almost as if my personal life for that month ceased to exist, and that there were little to almost no actual unique personal events that occurred for me in that time span. And that's something I can't say that I've ever experienced before. But for the entire month, I was just glued to the one-track mentality of just progressing through and finishing the video. It was like I was pretty much thinking about this one thing for 28 straight days. I'd go to sleep and wake up thinking about what I'm going to do next for the video. And in hindsight, I don't particularly believe it was very healthy to work myself that way, which is why I don't ever plan on working that hard on any other project ever again in the future. But you know, going through and working hard just that once, I'm actually pretty content with how things worked out. Almost as sort of this testament to prove that I'm capable of doing it. And the process of overcoming those time constraints to end up with a finished product that was as good as it was, I really ended up impressing myself. And I still, to this day, feel a great sense of pride for just how much I was able to accomplish in that short period of time. And you know, until I told this story, nobody else really knew just how hard it was on me, other than myself. But I didn't really need to boast. I consider that whole personal challenge to be a pretty nice notch on my belt. So, Sweet Home, Alabama, indeed. To say this state has a checkered past would be a massive understatement. As a matter of fact, I don't think any other state in this country has as complex and a controversial history as Alabama. I mean, if you look out there at the nature by itself, it's beautiful. But don't be fooled. This place has had a very ugly past. Something that's always thrown me off about Alabama is just the soil. I mean, look how red it is. It's like we're on Mars or something. It's uncanny. At Talladega sometimes when you see the cars slide through the grass, it kicks up a huge cloud of red, dusty soil. It's just another element that makes Talladega and Alabama unique. So I ended up being very glad that I held myself to that deadline because I managed to finally put the video out the Friday before the race. The race weekend was October 2nd and 3rd, and I think I put the video out October 1st or somewhere around there. I cut it very close, but I made it. And boy, I was glad that I did, because that particular weekend, 2021, the days after I posted that video, I will go so far as to say it was the most controversial race weekend in Talladega history. When you consider all 3 of the races that took place that weekend, I don't think you can find another case in the entire history of the track where all 3 races of the weekend were drugged down by some severe controversy. Every single race had a moment at the end that made a lot of people either confused or incensed. I've been watching Talladega for almost my whole life, and I don't think I've seen a race weekend where in its totality it was that controversial. So the first race was the truck race, and this was a race where everyone basically crashed each other. There were very few cars running at the end. And then by the end of it all, a back-of-the-pack driver by the name of Tate Fogelman, a guy that pretty much no one has ever heard of, he basically just takes out the guy in first place to steal the win. Now, NASCAR is a sport where it's never really been clear whether you're actually allowed to intentionally wreck someone or not. They've been pretty inconsistent on it through the years, but hey, it was Tate Fogelman's lucky day because he never got any penalty, even though it looked like he pretty blatantly crashed the first place car for the win. So that was controversial finish number 1. Controversial finish number 2 happened in the Xfinity Series race later that day. So on Saturday of the race weekend, they run the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series race on the same day. It's a double header. Well, it turns out on this day, the Truck Series race had so many crashes and so many caution flags that it actually pushed the Xfinity race off schedule. So Talladega is notoriously one of the most popular NASCAR tracks that does not have lights, meaning that they are unable to run the races past dusk. And since the Truck Series race took so long with all the crashing, the Xfinity Series race was unable to be completed in its full duration. They had to cut the race short by about 10 laps because of impending darkness. And so once that news came out, people were already pretty ticked off because they weren't getting the full race that they paid for. They didn't even get to see a green flag finish. I believe there was an accident and the race ended under caution with Brandon Brown as the leader. Now at first, this was a nice feel-good story. Underdog driver, underfunded team, great story. You know, he gets his first win at Talladega. Well, I'll tell you, if you don't believe that Talladega's cursed, you just might have to ask Brandon Brown on what happened to him afterwards. Because this just might have ended up being the costliest win for any driver in NASCAR history. Completely not his fault at all. Just a product of the most unfortunate circumstance you can probably imagine. Many of you have probably heard of what ended up becoming the outcome of this situation. But most people don't know exactly how we got there. So this moment right here, Brandon Brown's first career victory, ended up being ground zero for the Let's Go Brandon political movement. And it happened right there at the finish line at Talladega. One of the biggest, most obnoxious controversies from the past year. It spawned right in Talladega. So they were doing the post-race interview at the finish line, and all the Talladega fans in clear audible view of the camera crew were chanting F Joe Biden. The reporter who was interviewing Brandon Brown either misheard or she was trying to euphemize the whole situation for the network. So she ended up saying that the fans were chanting, "Let's go Brandon," to celebrate Brandon Brown's victory.
Let's go Brandon!
And I was watching the race at home, and it seemed pretty insignificant at the time, but who knows? Sometimes the stupidest, most insignificant nonsense can end up being such a big thing in the future that you end up scratching your head wondering how that even happened. But man, now all of a sudden Brandon is the #1 controversy in America. And the really sad part of all of it is that his sponsors no longer wanted to be associated with a driver whose name basically sparked the biggest political controversy in the nation. And so Brandon Brown, through no fault of his own, basically lost all of his funding for his team that was already struggling financially. You'd think that winning your first race and finally getting in the spotlight for the first time, that's a dream come true for any driver. But for Brandon Brown, the whole thing ended up becoming his worst nightmare. And this Saturday, we went to go see him 1 year later, and I think it's going to end up being his last race in that car. So an absolute tragic turn of events for his career. Every driver wants to win, but this particular win at Talladega might end up costing him everything through no fault of his own. And all this stuff happened pretty much a day after I uploaded my video, talking about how Talladega is the most controversial and the most cursed track on the schedule, and how all these mysterious things just wind up happening there that happen nowhere else. So it was somewhat fitting to see just how much that video was proven correct almost instantaneously. So if you're keeping track, in the 2021 Fall Talladega weekend, we're 2 for 2 on races with ridiculous controversy. Well, Sunday comes around and it's time for the Cup Series, the big boys, to take the track. Why not make it 3 for 3? So Sunday's race got rained out, which already in and of itself is pretty cursed and misfortunate, because for almost all the spectators who drove out to the track, they're not going to be able to see the race anymore because they got to go to work on Monday. But you know, we live in the South. The weather can be pretty inclement. A race getting rained out is not quite a big deal. It happens a lot more often than you'd think. But the thing that ended up fanning the flames of controversy was the winner of that Monday's race. So Bubba Wallace, who just 18 months earlier was at the forefront of NASCAR's biggest controversy possibly ever, the case of the mistaken garage door pull rope, which happened at where else but Talladega. That 1 week was the most relevant that NASCAR had been in the news for years, and it wasn't for anything positive. That whole incident pretty much just cast a dark shadow over the sport that it certainly didn't need. And even more than a year afterwards, a lot of people just never forgave Bubba for what happened. And so when he ended up winning his very first race that rainy Monday afternoon, there were a lot of NASCAR fans who experienced a bit of a meltdown over it. I don't know if I'm off base with this, but I'd say it was the most controversial race win since I've been watching. A lot of people were very, very unhappy to see him go to victory lane. And it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because it should have been a very nice moment. But due to all the controversy and baggage that preceded it, that moment that should have been glorious is going to go down as being tainted. But what do you know? Controversy, drama, first-time winners. These are all things that I mentioned in my video about Talladega. I wouldn't exactly say that it was an easy video to write, but sometimes reality just writes itself. So as the week went on, it became clear to me that the hurricane, thankfully, wasn't going to become an issue for me. But the week of bizarre events would not stop there. So for those who know me, I follow the NFL. And on the Thursday before Talladega, I witnessed one of the most traumatic things I've ever seen on a football field. Now, my fellow NFL fans will know what I'm referring to, but for those out of the loop, on the Thursday night game between the Dolphins and the Bengals, the Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa suffered one of the worst injuries I think I've ever seen. The dude was concussed, very clearly concussed, in a game that he played just 4 days earlier. And for whatever reason, they wanted to keep the winning streak alive or what, they sent him back into this game. And on one very bad play, it looked like his career was pretty much over. I was actually watching what happened at Wavy's house, and Wavy, for those of you who don't know, used to work as a nurse. So he has quite a bit of knowledge about medical injuries. I'm not going to play the clip here, you can seek it out on your own right, but it is graphic, and it is very disturbing to see what happened. I think Wavy described what happened as this condition called decortic shock, a term I had not seen used before and probably won't see used in the future. I don't think it's very common, especially in professional sporting events, because the circumstances for it to occur would have to require an extreme amount of negligence and misfortune, both of which happened on this fateful night. Basically, decortic shock is this involuntary bodily response that occurs after significant trauma to the brain, brainstem, or spinal cord. It's awfully unsettling and unnerving to see, because I think thus far, medical science still doesn't understand why it happens. It basically involves the body falling limp and the hands tensing up and retracting to near the chest area. It's like it harkens back to something deep within our evolutionary history, almost like when we were mice living underground after the asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs. It's just some ancient, primordial response to a traumatic situation where the body is almost having its last-ditch effort to preserve its life and to preserve its being. It was very gut-wrenching and very disturbing to watch that unfold in real time on a football field in front of thousands and thousands of spectators. It was brutal. I can't think of another injury that occurred during a live football game that was worse than what Tua Tagovailoa went through that Thursday night. I wouldn't be surprised if he never plays again. And who would blame him, you know? And what's extremely frustrating about this is that this whole traumatic scene was inflicted on all of us because of negligence, because they just sent him out there even though he was clearly concussed just 4 days earlier, and they just sent him out again because the show must go on. I think a lot of other NFL viewers were traumatized as well by what they saw happen to Tua. In the immediate aftermath of the injury, after it aired on live TV, I believe that 27 of the top 30 Twitter trends in the United States were about Tua. This incident got people talking, and I think it raised a lot of questions over what we're even doing as spectator sports fans. You know, the game went on after that, but nobody could really think about anything else. I think there comes a point as sports spectators where we lose sight of the humanity on display in front of us. It's fun to watch athletes be great at what they do, but deep down, they're no more fallible than the rest of us. They're no more human than the rest of us. They are capable of accomplishing incredible physiological feats. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are. The human body is still subject to the same limitations, the same fundamental laws of nature that are unbreakable. I think that for most NFL fans in the immediate aftermath of the incident, it was clear that a lot of them had never seen anything like that. And I've been watching football about my whole life, and I never seen anything that bad. I think in the aftermath, based on the online response, it was probably the worst thing that a lot of these NFL fans had ever seen. But as someone who watches a lot of NASCAR, the Tua injury was not the most traumatizing thing I've ever seen in a sporting event. So football is a contact sport, and people get injured fairly often. But to see someone sustain a life-threatening injury, that's pretty rare and unusual. And I think most generations of football fans watching today haven't seen anything close to it. But speaking as someone who watches a lot of NASCAR, witnessing a life-threatening situation in a live sporting event is unfortunately something that I'm already quite familiar with. In 2020, at the end of the Daytona 500, I think everyone thought Ryan Newman was dead in that accident he suffered right on the roof of the driver's side compartment. Miraculously, he survived, and it looks like he made a full recovery. But this odd, misfortunate situation where you start to lose sight of the competitive aspect of whatever sport you're watching, and your focus instead shifts to whether everyone is even all right, whether they're going to live to see the next day. That's an experience which, unfortunately, NASCAR fans are all too familiar with. The history of the sport is littered with disasters, death, pain, suffering, many of which happen right nearby here at Talladega Superspeedway. It is as inseparable from Talladega as it is from the sport as a whole. I think there's a lot to be said about spectator sports and why exactly we watch. Is it to watch the best athletes in the world perform superhuman feats? Or is it something more morbid, more primal than that? Going back to the days of Rome and the gladiators, seeing people get torn apart by a lion, all in the name of entertainment. Have we as a civilization truly progressed beyond that? You know, they always say the show must go on, especially in today's money-hungry world. But sometimes you encounter these rare moments where you stop and catch your breath as a human, and you start to think about what we've lost and what we've given up. All right, so it's Saturday morning. We're headed down to the track. The truck race is going on right now, and there's already some super cursed shit that has happened already a few laps in. I guess when we get there, we'll see just how much the curse lives up to its name. We are entering the Talladega mountain range, the cursed lands once roamed by the Muskogee Indians before they were forcibly removed. All right, so we made it to the world center of curses. Rear slap shoes.
Yeah.
Do you think that Talladega Superspeedway is cursed?
100%.
100%.
100%.
100.
It's too much like nutty shit that's happened here that has literally never happened anywhere else. That the only logical conclusion is that there is some sort of higher force at work here, beyond our comprehension.
It's the vengeful spirits of the Muskogee Indians who were removed from these lands.
Maybe that's the one true religion.
The one true religion.
The ancient gods, the Muskogee Indians.
It's like, I don't know what I worship, but I know what I fear. And it's this place. All right, so I'm here with Bigfoot, one of the biggest legends of mythology. And just like with most myths, you have to wonder how much of it is true and how much of it is just over embellished. Over the years of misfortune, Talladega has sort of been mythologized as this cursed land. And of course, very recently, I've added on to that legacy with my video. But there always comes a point when you have to wonder how much of it is superstition and how much just comes down to a lot of bad luck. For a place like Talladega, it's hard to say for sure. But if one thing's for sure, whatever wicked force seems to be permeating this Talladega area, there sure seems to be a lot of it.
It's like a really messed up version of like Pascal's wager, is like you worship the cruelest god imaginable, that way you're on his good side.
Yes. Hopefully my video last year appeased the vengeful spirits. As you can probably hear in the background, the trucks are on the track, and it's only going to get louder as we get closer. Last year when I was working on the Talladega video, I had a mysterious lump grow on my back. It's like right here. It's like the size of a freaking golf ball, and it just materialized while I was putting this project together. Went to the doctor, it was benign, but it's awfully spooky. And then this year, when I scheduled this whole trip, hadn't been hit by a hurricane the entire season, and so I figure, man, just gotta make it a few more weeks and we'll be scot-free. Oh no. Basically, as soon as I get ready to fly out here, Hurricane Ian bearing down on my house. And I swear it's this track. This track like creates misfortune.
Yeah, even after your video, you thought the curse had been lifted because we had 3 first-time winners. But
right.
Tate Fogelman won a goofy race that was like a wreck fest. You know, then there was the Let's Go Brandon with Brandon Brown affair, and then Bubba Wallace wins his first race, but it was rain short.
Yes.
So I don't know what to make of that. The gods are sending mixed messages.
There were 3 winners, and every one of the winners was encumbered in some way by some nonsensical BS controversy. Well, so far on the way here, we were watching some of the race on the ride over, and we have already seen a driver almost get burnt to a crisp. It's like I have completely abandoned the idea of any normality at this track. It's just like, oh yeah, guy burnt to a crisp, almost sandwiched between the car and the wall. Yeah, it's just another Talladega, just added to the pile.
And then every once in a while, like, the dam of normalcy will break, and then you get like a caution-free race. The last 2 caution-free races were here at this track.
You know, there have been a lot of concerns recently over safety in the Cup Series new next-gen car. Something about the crumple physics or whatever. It doesn't transfer the weight of a crash properly, and the drivers are getting really banged up out there. The driver, Alex Bowman, announced this week, and he's a playoff driver, so he's got every incentive to compete, but he announced this week that he's gonna have to be missing the race because he got concussed last week at Texas. So there's just been this...
what looked like a very minor crash, by the way.
Yeah, there's like something seriously wrong with how the next gen car dissipates energy, and there's just been this looming ominous cloud hanging over this race where it seems like if something goes wrong, we might be in for a tragic situation.
Yeah, so a weird thing about Talladega is sometimes the drivers just get tired of the chaos and they will literally line up nose to tail 40 cars long and then just not do anything.
It's called train racing.
Oh yeah, the freight train, choo-choo.
And yes, it's possible to have a perfectly stable pack of cars in single file. And while it may be tempting to do that, the allure of the playoffs and solidifying your name in victory lane, that is usually enough to get people to defect from the otherwise stable system.
Yeah, so it's sort of like this form of protest, but at the same time there's like money and glory waiting at the end of it, and all it takes is one guy to decide he's not going to play along, and then it's just all chaos from there.
That's right. And We're gonna be catching the tail end of this truck race right here, and something's telling me we're gonna be seeing a lot of that. Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Running on Downward Race Review. Race number 1, the Truck Series race. So we ended up leaving the hotel a little bit late, so we missed the beginning of the race. But a couple of people I was traveling with had it pulled up on their phone. And already, before we got to the track, there was some extraordinarily cursed stuff going on. So you had Jordan Anderson's truck erupt in a fireball. And I guess it was getting so hot in the cockpit that he literally attempted to get out of the vehicle before it came to a stop. And boy, talk about a close call. He almost became a burnt pancake right there, because if he had lost his footing just a little bit getting out of the truck window, his body would have been completely crushed between the inside retaining wall and the truck, because that was going to end up on some horror YouTuber's top 10 list right there. So already a very scary and unusual Talladega moment right out of the gates. But we're not even close to done with that for this race. So I think about the time we were pulling up to the track, there's another bizarre incident involving Hailie Deegan's tire changer. So they came in for service under green flag pit stops, and for whatever reason, one of the tires they were bringing out got knocked away into the infield. And so this tire changer ends up running after the tire almost into the middle of a racetrack with speeding trucks going over 180 miles per hour. If somehow there was an incident where a car was spinning down to where this guy was running across, they would have had to scrape whatever was left of him off the infield grass. So that was very unusual. I think I've only seen it happen one other time in NASCAR, where one of the pit crew guys went out almost into traffic to go pick up a tire that they lost. So already an hour into this race weekend, we have two very unusual, very bizarre, potentially life-threatening events happen at Talladega. And so shortly after that, we got to our seats in the grandstands. And I think within 5 minutes of sitting down, there was a big wreck coming out of turn 4. There were only about 30 laps left at that point, so we watched to the end of the race. I think there were a few more crashes involving a couple trucks, but man, the ultimate crash of the day, the entire weekend, happened right as the entire field was barreling down to the finish line on the last lap. There were pretty much two independent crashes that happened in the lead pack of cars. When they got to the tri-oval, one guy in the middle of the pack slammed the wall and took out a few behind him. And then the leaders, as they were gunning for the win, they all took each other out. I don't know if there was a single car that got through that last pack without damage in the finishing stretch there. There was dust and smoke kicked up all over the entire front stretch. It just about blocked out the sun. There was so much carnage. So yes, it looked like the makings of another typical, unfortunately, Talladega weekend, where everyone just takes each other out and it's just the survival of the fittest out there. The winner of the race is going to have to call on Moses to part the Red Sea of sheet metal in front of them so they can somehow drive through and not get taken out in a massive melee. So the big wreck to the finish in and of itself would have already been a pretty spectacular end to the race. But hey, this is Talladega, so we might as well add in a little bit of controversy and contrivance to the ending here. So after that first wreck, shortly before the finish line, NASCAR threw the caution and froze the field before the trucks actually got to the line. So the actual finishing results of the race were determined at wherever the last scoring loop or whatever was. I'm not actually even sure about that. It might have been the photo evidence of right when the caution came out, but regardless, the actual finish line did not dictate the finish of the race. And it was an awful shame that it didn't, because it would have been one of the closest, most spectacular photo finishes in NASCAR history. Because right when they got to the finish line, the two lead trucks were so close together, you almost couldn't even visually see who got to the finish line first. I think it actually would have been the closest margin of victory in NASCAR history if they hadn't thrown the caution and frozen the field just a couple hundred feet before. But even with the scoring and the protocol and the officiating, hell, depending on how you bend the rules, there's an argument to be made that one of any 4 drivers could have been handed that win. For a second, it looked like Brett Holmes had won it in what would have been his first ever win in the Truck Series. But also in the mix were Ben Rhodes, who was in the process of crashing across the finish line, and Matt DiBenedetto, who was initially reported to have passed below the line. But later, the officials ended up determining that he was forced down by Ben Rhodes, and therefore Ben Rhodes was disqualified, and Matt DiBenedetto was slightly ahead of Brett Holmes when the caution came out and when the field was frozen, and he was given the win at Talladega. His very first win, as it turns out, in NASCAR. And hey, what can I say? Talladega has a knack for putting out these somehow miraculous first-time winners, and Matty D got it done today. But it wasn't necessarily a clean win, and it wasn't without controversy by any stretch of the imagination. All right, so the first race is over. It was a complete, ridiculous, absurd finish from hell. There were like 4 different guys that you could have argued could have won the race. In terms of whether or not that was cursed, I'd say that was absolutely cursed. So we're 1 for 1 so far. So it seemed like already all the stops have been pulled out for just the Talladega ridiculousness that tends to happen when the NASCAR guys come to town. And we still had 2 races left in the weekend to go. All right, so race number 2 of the doubleheader on Saturday, the Xfinity Series race. Now, the last time these Xfinity Series drivers were on a super speedway, they about wrecked every car in the field. At the end of it all, there were probably 2 cars out of 40 that did not have some kind of major body damage. You know, as is the case with the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series has a lot of young, unproven, and sometimes hot-headed guys that don't exactly have the experience or the poise to make it through a race unscathed. You know, it's the purpose of these lower division series for all these young guns to get these mistakes out of their system before they get promoted to the top level of the sport. So with these Xfinity and truck races, you can typically expect a level of sloppiness out of the competition that you don't really see at the highest level. And man, based on how Daytona went just a couple months earlier, my expectations for this race were pretty low. But man, over the next couple hours, I would end up being very pleasantly surprised. I think the only real accident in this race was when Ty Gibbs spun out in front of the entire field on lap 3, and miraculously, even though cars were going to the left and right at him at 100-mile-per-hour difference, he didn't get hit by any other driver, and he just barely grazed the wall and ended up getting so little damage that he was able to just continue in the race almost like nothing happened. That was pretty miraculous in my mind. It's as if the vengeful Talladega spirits were somehow warded off for this specific race. And that incredible accident avoidance on lap 3 pretty much ended up setting the tone for the whole rest of the race, because these guys went out there and pretty much did not have a single other incident for the next 100 laps. The next part of the race was pretty uneventful. There was a lot of just riding around, train racing, as it's called in the sport. It turns out that at Talladega, the drivers can enter into these formations where they go single file for many, many, many laps, and it's completely stable. The drivers are just content with holding their position and not passing anybody, and they stay in just a long single file line for dozens and dozens of laps. So that's pretty much how the field was organized in this race up until about the very end. And with this race, we ended up getting a very exciting and satisfying photo finish where AJ Allmendinger, my pick for that week's NASCAR podcast, ended up edging out the win just barely over the second place driver. Very exciting finish after a race that was mostly uneventful. We got our money's worth for that moment alone. But you know, after the race, a stat came out about what we just saw that was absolutely mind-boggling, because it turns out, I believe it was reported that this race that we just saw was the first Xfinity Series race in history where all of the cars that started the race finished the race as well. And that to me is just completely mind-blowing. You know, it reflects this duality with Talladega that I covered briefly in the video. Where in the Cup Series, it turns out Talladega is the last track to ever have a race with no cautions. But what we just experienced on that Saturday afternoon was arguably more impressive than a caution-free race. Because for there to be not one car to retire from the race, whether it be mechanical issue or a crash or whatever, that is a feat that was virtually unprecedented in NASCAR. I mean, you can have caution-free races where there are no accidents, but almost always someone has some kind of mechanical issue, engine failure, and they end up having to take the car to the garage and retire. And to see this race with this many inexperienced drivers, to have all 40 cars who started the race cross the finish line, that's something that may never happen again. So it just goes to show, I guess, this yin and yang of Talladega, where the first race of the day was danger, drama, oddities, and total destruction at the end. But then in the second race, they all took care of each other and everyone survived at the end. Well, it's been another successful day of racing at Talladega. Hopefully tomorrow's race goes just as smoothly. All right, so we're here with Slap Shoes once again. The race day is over. What did you think of these monumental events that we witnessed just a few hours ago?
I think you put it best, man. That was the tale of two races. It was like absolute utter chaos, guys not knowing what the hell they're doing. And then on the flip side of it was a perfectly clean race, not boring, lots of guys slicing and dicing out there, lots of big blocks, lots of big moves, and only one non-stage caution for a single car incident. And even then, you know, Ty Gibbs showed like some really, I don't like Ty Gibbs, but I gotta admit, the kid's got some major talent. The way he was able to, that thing was going to the inside, it was going to take out a bunch of guys. He sent it back towards the wall. He barely scrubs the wall. I didn't see where he finished, but he was running up in the lead pack when the race ended. So he recovered, had a decent finish for, you know, being the one guy who wrecked all day.
So yeah, today, instead of praying to Jesus, he was praying to Moses to part the Red Sea of cars yes. that was coming at 100 miles an hour in his back window.
Yeah.
And somehow not to get completely clobbered right there.
Missed him.
Yes.
And everybody just like didn't freak out. They go to the inside and everything. They weave around him. They re-rack him. They throw their green flag, and you know, they went green the whole way through. It was honestly kind of impressive.
Right. That Ty Gibbs accident was actually the only incident of the race. There was a few skirmishes on pit road. Single car spin on the last lap.
And then the truck race was just one problem after another. One guy burst into flames.
One guy burst into flames and almost got turned into... Jeez, fuck.
Oh my god.
All right, well...
A very uneven surface out here on the
That's
Okay.
That's a cursed artifact right there. Ryan Anderson, right?
Jordan Anderson.
Jordan Anderson almost became a pancake. A nice seared, burnt to a crisp pancake between his flaming car and the inside retaining wall.
Apparently there was fire inside the cab. There was also smoke. He couldn't breathe, so he was trying to get... He was left with a tough decision. You know, stay inside the car, wait till it comes to a complete stop, and hope you don't burn to death, or try to get out of the car now, away from danger, and potentially put yourself in more danger by getting out of a moving vehicle that's going towards a wall.
And then there was another incident we missed where apparently Deegan's tire changer went out on the racetrack in front of dozens of speeding trucks to retrieve a tire.
Which, this has happened before, and we know like that guy gets suspended and fines get issued and everything, and you become like the subject of a driver's meeting, which is never fun. And it's kind of like inexplicable that somebody would go out into the infield and do that. I don't know what went through his head, or he thought he could like annul the penalty if he just went out and got the tire. Like after the tire leaves the pit box, you got a penalty.
It's game over. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you go and get it. As a matter of fact, if you don't go get it, you could always just say, oh, that's somebody else's tire, unless they could trace it back to you that you bought that tire.
Yeah, so after that, pretty much the time we got into the stands, it was just multi-car wreck, and then the grand old finish where everyone wrecks.
Everybody wrecked. We're like before the apex of the tri-oval, so we just see nothing but like dirt and smoke. I couldn't even tell you who won.
It looked like the Mad Max storm where they go into the giant sandstorm with lightning and tornadoes.
Except there was actually like a big rig to like focus on. Like imagine there's no big rig and it's just like 3 dozen tiny little cars go into the sandstorm and you don't know who crossed the line first. That was the end of that race.
That was one of the most cluttered finishes I've ever seen because there was
It was like a goofy ass ending because they called the caution.
they
like
froze the field before they reached the finish line. The actual finish at the finish line could have been like an all-time close finish, but that wasn't actually the finish because they froze the field whenever the scoring loop was before the start finish line. So Matt DiBenedetto gets his first win. Talladega creates another first-time winner.
It's like in your video, Brendan Poole, inexplicably a few hundred feet from the line, they threw the caution, and some guy who's in the process of wrecking ends up getting the W over the guy who actually finished or crossed the line first.
Yeah, well, so I think it's safe to say today we saw the two sides of Talladega, the duality, war and peace. Makes us wonder what exactly we're going to see tomorrow.
It might fall somewhere in the middle, but I'm thinking it'll be one of the extremes where it'll be nothing happens or all hell breaks loose.
All right, well, guess we're just gonna have to wait and see. The sun sets on another Talladega day. Hopefully tomorrow will be as merciful to the men and women of our sport. And so after that, we headed back to the hotel, looking forward to the one remaining race in the weekend, the Cup Series, a race that arguably had the biggest potential for disaster and devastation out of any other race in the last 20 years. The fans, spectators, drivers, everyone in the sport had to be pretty anxious going into this weekend, because given the rather poor safety record of the next gen race car thus far, let's just say there was a pretty good chance of someone or even multiple people getting in a world of hurt this weekend. So going into that Sunday afternoon, I'd say it was pretty unnerving. People around the sport were kind of preparing for the worst. But you know what? Talladega, it seems like it always has a way of surprising people. All right, it is Sunday morning. We are making our return to the track. I'm not sure if it shows up that much on the footage, but this place is already starting to get packed. Whatever's gonna happen today out there on the track, there will be a lot of people to witness it. Currently sitting in line to get into the Talladega Garage Experience. So last year, after I came out with a video, the Talladega official Twitter account followed me, and I hit them up this week asking if they want to hook me up with any free things. And yeah, it turns out, courtesy of the track, they liked the video. We're getting into the garage area for free. All right, we're gonna be headed into that tunnel. Here we go, Talladega Tunnel. Going in, infiltrating the heart of the accursed land. Oh.
Scary.
Damn, bro. God.
I like that.
And just like that, we're in the track. Right, here we go. The Garage Experience. Yes, the Talladega Garage. A lot of controversy going on here. One deserving driver, or maybe undeserving, will be here at the end of the day. It's a packed house here for today's race. All right, it's been just 30 laps and there's already a huge incident. Seems like just as I suspected, these guys came out to play and not in a good way. There was one pretty big crash early on, but it seemed like everyone managed to walk away. But you know what? For the rest of the entire race, these guys put on a show. They proved why they are the best stock car drivers in America. Great racing, passing, action, and they did it all without piling up the whole field into a giant mass of sheet metal. I honestly don't think I can recall another Talladega race in the last 15 years that wound up being this clean and this pleasant to watch. So it was a great show through and throughout. Chase Elliott, the fan favorite driver, ended up making a great move with a couple laps to go, and he took home the trophy, sending the fans home happy. And boy, for all the controversy, drama, and heartache that Talladega has produced, and especially the last 10 or 15 years, it was finally nice to see a race where everyone could just go home happy. You know, I was expecting and I was prepared coming into this race for it to be a total disaster. Something that, just like what I saw with Tua on Thursday Night Football, would end up scarring me for the rest of my life. I think this race really had the potential to be that devastating. But you know what? These guys went out there and proved, once again, why we cheer them on and why we watch. They are the best in the business. And to go out and do what they did for 188 laps, man, it's a sight to behold. It was just really nice to see that on this particular Sunday afternoon, the Talladega Spirits decided to show mercy on the drivers and the people of NASCAR. And for that, we thank them. All right, well, that was the end of Talladega. So Talladega for 2022 is over. And I gotta say, I thought it was gonna be a massacre. I thought it was gonna be a bloodbath, but you know what? They took care of each other out there. One accident, and the rest of it was mostly caution-free.
Except for the guy who started the fire in the infield.
Oh yeah, that was
Because we have to have like a weird Talladega moment. That was it.
I mean, I gotta say, that was a quality race at Talladega. Something that we haven't seen, at least in the fall race, for quite some time. Pretty much the opposite of last year. Going into this weekend was very ominous. There were concerns of safety, concerns of driver injury. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to suggest that something really bad might have happened in this race. But you know what? The drivers went out there, mostly took care of each other, and we had a good, clean race. And that's pretty much all you can ask for. I guess it just goes to show that after all the trouble, maybe Talladega is not so evil after all. So we made a stop up here in the Talladega Mountains. Down there is the town of Oxford, Alabama. Several years ago, there was a news story about how they disrupted this 1,000-year-old Indian mound, one of the largest in the area. And they basically went up on the mound with a bunch of heavy machinery and excavated it and used the dirt to build a Sam's Club. It can be somewhat frustrating, the irreverence some people have for the past, because one way or another, you end up paying for it in the present. I think with sports, competition, and spectacle, there comes a certain level of savagery, of almost morbid curiosity in wanting to see the worst case scenario play out. It's awfully ironic to me, because the Muskogee people, and pretty much all Native Americans in that regard, were viewed as so-called savages. We pretty much wiped out their entire culture and people in the name of freeing them from savagery. And you know, after how far our civilization has come, you'd think that we would be the civilized ones. I don't know. I mean, looking back at how it all turned out, you have to wonder whether we were the true savages all along. Well, everyone, I guess that's the end of this week's adventure. Right after we pay a little visit to a familiar place. You know, I was coming into this weekend fully expecting this Sunday's race to be a disaster. But you know what? The drivers, for the most part, took care of each other. For the first time in what seems like forever, a race at Talladega ran nearly caution-free. It was a good, clean, entertaining, and safe race. One of the best races I've seen this entire year. I think I may have brought up a point like this in the Talladega video, but what if the whole Talladega curse isn't really based on anything? What if we, as very flawed individuals, are the makers of our own curses? You know, misfortune comes and misfortune goes. I can't explain why the race went off as well as it did, but I'm glad that it was a safe and peaceful day. The last time I came here, the valley was shrouded in clouds, but just as the hurricane has avoided us, we have avoided misfortune on this evening. But just like after every great hurricane, the sun is shining bright. I don't know why the race was so safe. Maybe it was because I warded off the spirits by bringing the Miccosukee back to their original lands. There's always going to be something mysterious about this place. Something uncanny, something unexplainable. Last time I was here, it was dark and cloudy, but today, the sun is shining bright over the Talladega Valley. For a place that's seen its history plagued by so much misfortune, it's good to finally have a moment of peace.